Well, greetings from the pastor's kitchen table. This is part 2 of the sermon that I preached this morning. There was just too much on this whole issue of shame to fit it into a sermon, plus some PG-13 stuff that we'll be talking about here that just wasn't appropriate to share in a sermon about the deeply biblical issue of shame. Now, just to repeat again, shame, the characteristics of shame are feeling exposed for who you really are, feeling that if somebody really knew who you are, they wouldn't like you. I said that in the sermon. A feeling of being embarrassed or diminished, that you're a bad person, that you count for nothing, that if you compare yourself to others, you fall short. A feeling of being deficient or defective for who you are. Let me give a couple of personal examples. When I was a kid, I used to have these recurring dreams, not of being president of the United States or jet airplane pilot, but I used to have these dreams about going to school with my raincoat on, my yellow raincoat, getting on a bus, going to school, and getting to my hall hook that said Burtness above it, taking my raincoat off, and realizing that I had forgotten to get dressed at home. And there I was standing buck naked in the hall, and the kids were looking at me and laughing at me. That's a feeling or an experience of shame. A feeling of being infertile. People who experience infertility, even for months or year or two, have that feeling of I'm a woman, I'm a man. One of the primal things that I need to do is to be able to reproduce, and people who are infertile often go through that feeling of shame. Vietnam was a case of national shame. We went up against this nation and we lost. And we couldn't deal with our shame. And we didn't have welcoming home day parades for the veterans because we were shamed of what happened over there. A person who's divorced, especially from a church family, whatever that might be, a person feels shame of being divorced. Being single at 40. What do we call a woman who's single at age 40? An old maid. Because they should be able to be married and they're not. There must be something wrong with them. People who have been raped, women who have been raped. Terrible feeling of shame that they should have done something about it. They've been violated, you know, all that stuff. And yet they feel shame for what has happened to them. Chapman, there's this guy, Gary Chapman, who's got a book entitled 5 Signs of a Loving Family. And let me just tell you a little bit about an example of this from that book. He cites the examples a number of years back when he went to visit the hospital for a 13-year-old who had stomach ulcers. And in order to talk with the kid about the emotional dynamics in his life, Gary Chapman said, "So how do you get along with your dad?" And the 13-year-old hospitalized with ulcers. Gary Chapman said, "How do you get along with your dad?" And he said, "Well, not so good." And Gary Chapman said, "Give me some examples." And the kid says, "I get B's on my report card and my father always says you should have gotten A's. You're smarter than that. If I'm playing ball and I get a double, my father says you should have made a triple. Can't you run? I mow the lawn, and when I get done, my father always finds something wrong with the job I did and says, you didn't get under the bushes." And Dr. Chapman said that the boy said to him, I can't do anything right. I can't do anything right. I can't do anything to please my father. Now, of course, what the father was trying to communicate to his son was, dude, when you go to school, live up to your potential. When you hit a ball, give it all you got. If your job is worth doing, it's worth doing well. The father was trying to communicate that with his son. But what was the son hearing? The son was hearing, I can't do anything right. I can't please my dad no matter what I do. Were those words from the dad affirmation? No. The son was not being encouraged. He was being discouraged. What the dad was unintentionally doing was instilling a sense of shame that his son is not capable of doing anything right, and whatever he did, it was constantly wrong. I think Chapman also writes this, that the time to help a child bring a B to an A is not when the child brings a report card home. That's the day to praise an a B. Okay, dude, you got a B. Several weeks later, when the semester is beginning, then it's time to talk to your child and say, you know, you did a good job getting that B in math. What do you think you could do? What would we need to do together to bring that B up to an A? The time to teach a child to stretch a double into a triple is not when he makes a double. That's the day to cheer from the sidelines and say, go, Bill. Several days later, it might be the time to teach a child how to make a double into a triple, or mowing the lawn. When the kid's done, say, great job. A couple days later, say, you know, next time you mow the lawn, maybe let's think about this or this or this. The point is not to say it. The point is when to say it. The point is when to say it. We need words of affirmation and encouragement so much, and we need that from those who love us and care for us, no matter how much we think we don't measure up. We need words of encouragement and affirmation. Proverbs 3, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to do it. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, especially when it's in your power. That's one important way to avoid shaming a person, when they feel they can't do anything right. Shame is pervasive when you know how to look for it, when you know enough about it to look for it. Why do kids join gangs? You don't get a kid who's very confident about himself and, you know, I can conquer the world to join a gang. Kids who join a gang are outcast, shamed kids who go to that gang for affirmation, for acceptance. Even though it's a false kind of acceptance, that's why they go to gangs. The world tells them you're worthless, you're a failure, you're stupid, you don't belong. They go to a gang and they say, hey, we're going to give you a nickname of Rock or Killer or whatever it is. And all of a sudden, when a kid joins a gang, he's somebody, because he's not experiencing that in the world around him. Shame is a feeling of inferiority and defeat and alienation. Shame is a sickness of the soul. Shame is a wound felt from the inside out, which divides us from ourselves, as a sickness of the soul. Also, of course, divides us from others and separates us from God. In the wake of the whole Jerry Sandusky thing, think of that. I said this morning about how the kids were, when they were put on a witness stand, were, you know, their eyes didn't look down, they, you know, fleeting glances and everything. Those kids are shame-based. Not only what happened to them, but when they were preyed upon by a predator like Jerry Sandusky, who sets up the Second Mile, which did a boatload of good for all kinds of people, but that's exactly where a predator like Sandusky hangs out. Because you read in all the stuff that we'll be hearing about in the past weeks and coming weeks about the predatory nature of pedophiles. They prey on shame-based kids. And on the news the other night, it said a sexual predator can go into a room of 50 kids and identify 3 kids that they can prey upon. And those are 3 kids who are shame-based, who like the affirmation, like the little notes that Jerry Sandusky gave, didn't mind the hand on the knee. Somebody was caring for them. As it progressed, they kept not saying anything to anyone, and horrible things happened because of the predatory nature of pedophiles toward shame-based kids. I'm not blaming the kids. I'm blaming the predator who knows how to identify shame-based kids. That's why, you know, I gave that God loves you ball to the kids in a children's sermon today, just to talk about, you know, God loves you, your parents love you, talk to God, talk to your parents if something is bothering you. Anyway, you heard about that in the sermon today. That was in relation to that. So how do we get shame? One way, Ernie Larson has his book, kind of a groundbreaking book, maybe 20 years ago, entitled Shame. And universal criticism, feeling that nothing you ever do is good enough, feeling unwanted because nobody cares or because your conception was a mistake. People who are adopted often have experienced the severing of an interpersonal bridge because their mom didn't want them, gave them up for adoption. They weren't worth having. If you're a mistake, that's not just a reality that you embrace. I remember, anyway, that's another longer story I mentioned in the sermon. Won't even go into that. No family rules. If there's no family rules, kids grow up feeling nobody cares. Or if there's unreasonable family rules, then the kid grows up never being able to measure up to the family rules, always got to get an A, always model, that whole stuff. So no family rules instills shame. Unreasonable family rules also. So it's a balance, important balance. Physical or sexual abuse, feeling that somehow you brought it on or deserved it. Excuse me, feeling that you're responsible for someone else's behavior. A wife who feels responsible because her husband is drinking or abusing her. She says, and he tells her, if you wouldn't do this, I wouldn't have done that. He blames her when she takes it upon herself. That is shame. Expectations beyond the ability to learn in a new job, feeling that you're a failure. No matter what you do, you fail, you fail, you fail. If there's expectations beyond the time to learn. Or sibling comparison is another origin of shame. Why can't you be like your sister? You're not good enough as who you are. Why can't you be like your sister? Now, summarizing from the sermon this morning, guilt is something external. Guilt is about something we've done. Guilt can be healthy and constructive because it can help you behave in a more constructive way. Guilt is, I made a mistake. I made a mistake. Shame, on the other hand, is not external, it's internal. It's who I am. Shame is never healthy. Shame is always destructive. Guilt can be constructive. Shame is always destructive. Shame is, I am a mistake. I am a mistake. Guilt is, I made a mistake. Shame is, I made a mistake. We poor sinners confess unto thee that we are by nature sinful and unclean, that we've sinned against thee in thought, word, and deed. I mean, there's just as I am without one plea. Or Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. There's lots in religion that is almost shaming. Of course, guilt is positive. Shame can be very negative. In the Bible, I talked a little bit about Genesis 2 and 3. The first effect of sin is shame. We saw thee walking and we were afraid. We hid ourselves because we were ashamed. There's a pastor who was visiting a family, young woman, and knocked on the door. He sensed some movement in the house, and nobody answered the door. So he put his church card in the door, wrote on there Revelation 3:20. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone opens, I'll come in and we'll have lunch. The woman, as she's going out of church, gives him a business card. He wrote Revelation 3:20. She wrote Genesis 3:20. Pastor thought, Genesis 3:20? He goes to his Bible and it says, I heard the sound of thee in the garden, and sound of thee in the garden, and I hid myself, for I was naked and afraid. Anyway, not really funny, but kind of. Shame is in Judges. I won't give you all the Bible verses. Talk to me if you'd like them. They shamed the people that they had conquered by cutting off their thumbs and their big toes, affecting their ability to grasp right, affecting their ability to walk. In 1 Samuel 11, shaming the people they conquered by gouging out their eyes. In 2 Samuel 10, shaming the people they conquered by cutting off half of their beards. Why is beard cutting such an issue in the Amish community? Amish guys are taught you shave until you get married. Once you get married, the Bible says women grow your hair long, men groom but grow your beard long. For them, it's a sign of blessing, commitment. It's a sign of being Amish. And when their beards are cut off, it shames them. I just looked online about this guy who's Amish, got his beard cut off, and it said these words online. Bible, you grow your hair long when you get married, and describing a guy who got his beard cut off from his son. He said, my dad was totally destroyed. He was humiliated. He was a broken man. Because of his beard being cut off means nothing to us, means everything to them. In 2 Samuel 13, of course I couldn't tell the story in the sermon today, but 2 Samuel 13, King David had multiple wives, concubines and all that stuff. He had a son, Ammon, and a daughter, Tamar, half brother and sister. And let me just read. Ammon, a son, became frustrated to the point of illness on account of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Read between the lines. Now Ammon had a friend called Jonadab, remember that name. David's brother Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He asked Ammon, why do you, the king's son, look so haggard every morning after morning? Why don't you tell me? Ammon said to him, I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. Go to bed. This is what Jonadab says, a predator. Go to bed and pretend to be ill. When your father comes to see you, say to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare food for me, all this stuff. So Ammon went to lie down, pretending to be ill. David, the king, came to see him. Ammon said, I'd like my sister Tamar to come see me and make me some pancakes. David sent word to Tamar to go to the palace. She goes in to see him. She made some pizza dough, whatever it is that she made for him in 2 Samuel 13. Ammon says, sick from his bed, get everybody out of here. Everybody left him. Ammon said to Tamar, bring the food into my bedroom so I can eat from your hand. What is she suspecting? This is her half-brother. So she took him to eat. He grabs her and says, come to bed with me, my sister. Don't, my brother, she says, don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Do not do this wicked thing. What about me? Where would I put my shame? She says, realizing that she's about to be raped by her half-brother, she says, what about me? Where will I put my shame? She's done nothing wrong, and yet the shame of being raped from her brother is so great. What is she going to do with it? So, anyway, he refused to listen to her, and he's stronger than her. 2 Samuel 13, verse 14, he raped her, his half-sister. Then, after the rape, he's so angry with her that he kicks her out, and she says, no, don't kick me out. Sending me away would be a greater wrong than you've already done to me. So, anyway, he sends her out. And Tamar, because of being raped against her will, Tamar put ashes on her head, tore the ornament robe that she was wearing. She put her hand on her head and went away, weeping aloud as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, her brother Absalom says to her, has that Ammon your brother been with you? And then he says to her, his sister, be quiet now, he's your brother. He says, don't take this thing to heart. Don't take this thing to heart. She's full of shame, ashes on her head, shame beyond belief. Her brother says, don't take this thing to heart. And Tamar lived in her brother's Absalom's house, a desolate woman. It goes on, but the rape of Tamar is a huge story of shame in the Old Testament. I talked this morning about the shame of the lepers. Shame, 6 experiences of shame. It's disgust at yourself, wanting to crawl into a hole. That's what Tamar did. It's deficiency. It's feeling inadequate or bad, or thinking people are snickering about you. It's a feeling of desertion. People who divorce are deserted, not by their family necessarily, but by their friends. And their friends often, especially their married friends, unconsciously feel that they don't want to catch what they got. They don't want to catch the divorce bug. And so they start not inviting them. And the divorced person experiences shame and desertion. Dishonor, losing face. Remember years ago when the Japanese skater in the Olympics apologized to the nation for getting a silver medal instead of a gold because he shamed his nation. Japanese executives who jump out of buildings because of shame. There's a national shame that they deal with in Japan. So think of that. Think of that. Summarizing and getting to the end. Absolution and forgiveness deals with behavior. Deals with behavior. Forgiveness is not appropriate for shame. A person who is shame-based doesn't need to be forgiven. They need to be loved and accepted for who they are. For who they are. Shame is kind of like a donut that surrounds the core of sin. If you are shame-based, you can't hear forgiveness because you've defined yourself internally as an unforgivable, unlovable person. So those words of forgiveness bounce off that donut of shame. So they live with that shame. What they need is love and grace and acceptance. When dealing with a shame-based person, one of the unhelpful things to say is, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. Fact is that they do. The fact is that they do. The kind of response, you shouldn't feel that way, only deepens the feelings of shame. If they're incorrect with their feelings, then they've just messed up one more time. I have this cough that's coming back. That's why I keep drinking the fluid. Back in my first parish, when Alex was born, there was a young woman, massively overweight, unpopular, would never look you in the eye, never, very shame-based. She thought her parents, she'd come and talk to me. She'd say, my parents hate me. I would say, oh, Brenda, they don't hate you. She said, yeah, they do. And unknowingly, I was heaping more shame on her because she was telling me that they hate them is what she felt. And I was saying, oh, they don't hate you. I was doing the wrong thing. She was babysitting for Matthew and Alex one night at a dance or something like that, wedding dance. And Alex was at the stage of life when he hugged. It was like 1.5 years old or 2. He'd put his head here, put his arm around you. He'd wrap his legs around you and hold on like a little monkey. Hold on. It used to be funny because when he'd do that, I would hold my arms out and I'd shake and shake. I couldn't move him. He held on so much. We brought Brenda back to the hotel room with Alex and Matthew, and Matthew walked in, and Alex was asleep on Brenda, holding on to her, holding on to her. This woman, young woman, who thought that nobody loved her because she thought she was unlovable, shunned by her family, by her friends and everything. Alex gives her this hug. People don't hug her. So we came back 3 hours later. When we put her in a hotel room, I said, I'll take Alex. Yeah, no, that's fine. She sat down in a chair. 3 hours later, we returned. Alex was just still, fast asleep, holding on. And Brenda, this unlovable, incredibly overweight gal, was getting a 3-hour hug from somebody who wouldn't question because he was sleeping, who could only love. That's what Brenda needed, just love, acceptance, and a 3-hour hug. So sin needs to be forgiven, but not shame. Shame needs to be accepted and listened to and respected with a ministry of quiet presence. Above all, we need to remember the incarnation. God is not ashamed to call us his own. That's why I gave the kids the ball this morning. Kids, if there's something you're ashamed about, talk about it. Talk about it. God's going to love you and accept you. Talk to your mom or dad. They're going to love you and accept you. Just talk to them about it. So that's why the Bible has so many stories of extravagant love and grace and acceptance. The woman caught in the very act of adultery. I mean, imagine that. The lepers at the edge of town. All these kind of people. The woman with the sinner, prostitute that Jesus used to hang out with. Love and grace and forgiveness. Accepting of a person who was shame-based on their road to recovery. That's what I wanted to share about with you a little bit more this afternoon after the sermon this morning. I hope it blesses you, and I hope you're able to see it in the eyes, in the posture, in the experience of people, because you can make a difference in their lives through love and grace and acceptance. And then they're able to hear a word of forgiveness. Thanks for listening. God bless, and maybe we'll do this again. Bye-bye.